Frank DiMora here with the End Times Research Ministry, December the 6th, 2016. There was news December the 6th of 2016 from Breaking Israel News. And the article is about Barack Obama and what they say he's going to be doing at the UN when they're voting on whether to have a Palestinian state or not. The headline reads, Obama's zero-hour Israel burn at UN foretold in stunning Jerusalem prophecy. It says the prophet Ezekiel prophesied that in the end days Jerusalem would be an international point of contention. And as President Barack Obama mauls a possibly devastating blow to Israel during his last weeks in the White House, that prophecy seems closer to fruition than ever. Now, without a question, Barack Obama has not been a true ally like our former presidents have been to the nation of Israel. And if there was ever a president that would go against Israel concerning the way he votes, that would be Barack Obama. So I definitely agree with this section of the article. But there's something major that you'll be seeing in here that I'll be pointing out that doesn't jive with what is being said in this report. Let me continue and you'll see. An international anti-Jerusalem scenario which sees President Obama using his final days in office to damage Israel via the UN, perhaps by allowing a resolution creating a Palestinian state to pass the Security Council without a U.S. veto, is familiar to those who have read the prophet Zechariah. And what they do is they give you a prophecy from the Old Testament, prophet Zechariah as they named, about Israel being a burdensome stone. And of course they're talking about Zechariah 12:3, and it says, and it shall come to pass in that day that I will make Yerushalayim a stone of burden for all the peoples. Yerushalayim is Jerusalem. So that's the prophecy. We know that that's true. In the last days, we've already witnessed how Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, has definitely becoming a burdensome stone. The article goes on, the connection was made by David Mark, chief editor of Israel Rising and political activist for Jewish indigenous rights in Israel, in a political commentary on his website Sunday. There is a clear trajectory to create a situation where just by an American absentee, a de facto Palestinian state would be created, he warned. Now, this is the part that you'll see. I'm going to connect the dots. I'm going to highlight it in blue. This is a real important section here. Should that happen, this state will forcibly divide Jerusalem, ripping out the Jewish nation's capital from within it and handing most of the holy sites to a made-up people that never existed. Now, when they're talking about dividing up Jerusalem and handing over these sites, the holy sites, they're talking about the Temple Mount right there in Jerusalem. And personally, I don't think that this is ever going to happen. Personally, I don't believe that Israel is ever going to let that happen because of what Jesus tells us and because of what we read in prophecy. And what I mean by that is, let me go over to those prophecies to explain. Now, the holy sites that are on the Temple Mount right now is, number one, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Dome of the Rock, of which is one of the most holy sites for Islam. This is where the first and the second Jewish temple once stood. Now, according to what we know from Scripture, let's go to the Old Testament first. Daniel the prophet in Daniel 9:27 says this, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Of course, the he that is referred to in this scripture is the Antichrist. In the last days, Antichrist will come. He'll confirm a covenant with Israel and many nations for a period of 7 years. I know it says 1 week, but you have to do a complete study of the book of Daniel because you'll see that it's in reference to time periods, and a week in this prophecy equals 7 years. And in the midst of the week, so in other words, in the midst of the week, that would be the exact middle of 7 years, 3.5 years, or 1,260 days. He shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. So, Israel does not have a third temple yet. This is what it's going to look like. Everything is prepared to build this third temple. And Daniel tells us that when an agreement is confirmed, the Jews will rebuild the temple. It'll be the third temple, and it will stand in Jerusalem where it was the first time and the second time. It's going to be there again. So this area has to be controlled by who? It's got to be controlled by Israel. And the reason why I'm saying this is because there's no way in the world that the Islamic nations would just sit back and allow Israel to build a third temple. There would be instant war. So something major has to take place. Now, according to the prophecy, we know that exactly 3.5 years after there's a confirmation of a covenant, the Antichrist will go into this holy temple, and he's going to tell the world at that point, that would be exactly 1,260 days after it's confirmed, that he is God. And then he's going to force everybody that he can to take his mark, which when you read the book of Revelation chapter 13, you'll see that that mark will be placed on the forehead or the hand. Now, Jesus also talks about the same thing in Matthew chapter 24, verse 15, where he says, "When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken by Daniel the prophet, stand in a holy place, whoever readeth, let him understand." So he's pointing right to Daniel from the Old Testament, and he's telling us same thing that Daniel told us, that there's going to be an abomination of desolation. He's going to be going into this temple, exactly what Daniel said 3.5 years into that confirming of that 7-year covenant. So the question to be asked when you're reading this verse right here, should that happen, this state will forcibly divide Jerusalem, ripping out the Jewish nation's capital from within and handing most of the holy sites to a made-up people that never existed. This cannot happen, and the reason why it can't happen is, just like I showed you, the Jews have to own this area. It's obviously right now that they do own it. They've owned it since 1967 when that war took place and they came in to the city of Jerusalem to overtake it for the first time in 2,000 years almost. And they're not going to just give it up arbitrarily to anyone. And I don't care what kind of vote or absentee ballot that the U.S. grants, Jerusalem will remain in the hands of the Jewish people. So I don't believe that whatever Obama does is going to affect the holy site area and take it away from the Jewish people. Now, when they're talking about Zechariah chapter 12, about the world coming against Israel, I believe that there is war coming. Now, they mention war in this article. Take a look. This is below. It says, starting right here, "I read prophecy as a filter for political commentary," Mark explained in an interview with Breaking Israel News. This prophecy describes Jerusalem as being a trigger for the war that comes later. And obviously he's pointing to the Ezekiel chapter 38 war. In that war, we see exactly who's going to be coming against Israel from the northern quarters surrounding the nation of Israel. It goes on, "The international element of the prophecy doesn't mean the world leaders will come to Jerusalem, but they will gather against it. The UN clearly seems to be indicated here, and the stage is being set for this to happen." Now, when it comes to this prophecy here, this is where I differ. Because he said the international element of the prophecy doesn't mean the world leaders will come to Jerusalem. But that's not what we're told in the book of Ezekiel. In the book of Ezekiel, we are told that they are coming against Israel in the last days. Now, in my book, The Last Chronicles of Planet Earth, which you can get today for free by going over to my website and just click the link for the book, I have a chapter about the attack that's coming in the future, which is found in Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39. So if you're interested in understanding this prophecy about Ezekiel and this coming war, Just go over to my book and read Invasion Against Israel, which starts on page 339. Now, I know the Israeli news said that they wouldn't have to come in. But again, that doesn't jive with the word of the Lord. And if it doesn't jive with the word of the Lord, you always have to stand on the word of the Lord, because that's 100% foolproof. It doesn't matter what any man says. What really counts is what God says. And look what he says here in Ezekiel chapter 38, verses 1 through 6. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face against Gog in the land of Magog, and the chief prince of Matesh and Tubal. Prophesy against him and say, This is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, O God, chief prince of Matesh and Tubal. I will turn you around and put hooks in your jaws and bring you out with your whole army, your horses, your horsemen, fully armed, and a great horde with large and small shields, all of them brandishing their swords. Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them, all with shields and helmets. Also Gomer with all its troops, and Beth Togarmah from the far north with all its troops, the many nations with you. So it's an army that is coming. They're carrying weapons, and they march towards Jerusalem to destroy the nation of Israel. Now, obviously, that's not going to happen, because in Ezekiel 38 and 39, we see that the enemies of Israel are going to be wiped out by God when they try to eliminate Israel. But the bottom line here is this. Not only does he tell us that this army is coming, but when you look at the prophecy, you will see that it even names the very nations that will be coming against the nation of Israel, and he gives us the direction of this army's approach to Israel. So when he says in this prophecy, doesn't mean that the world leaders will come to Jerusalem. That's a direct contradiction to the word of the Lord. Because the Lord, as I just showed you, shows us, yes, they are coming, an army against Jerusalem. So the question is, how would it be possible, with all the conflict right now between the Islamic nations in Israel over the city of Jerusalem right now, how would it be ever possible to have a third temple built on the Temple Mount itself? Well, we know that war is coming, and I believe that the first war that will come is the Psalm 83 war. And in that war, we see that the bordering nations of Israel are prophesied to come together as a confederate group of nations with the intention of destroying the nation of Israel, as it says in Psalms 83. And in that war, Israel wins that war. They'll win the war to the point that they'll be taking more land away from the Arabs who will attack them, and they'll feel safe enough to go ahead and build the temple on the Temple Mount that it once stood. That is a possibility. Now, the other possibility is there'll be a confirmation, just like Daniel 9:27 says. There'll be a peace agreement established that will allow the Jews to build the third temple right next to the Dome of the Rock and make Jerusalem an international city. And so when there's peace and there's safety, this third temple could be built right next to that religious site of the Muslims. And then 3.5 years into the 7-year peace pact, or that is confirmed by the Antichrist, that's when he'll go in and he'll tell everyone that he is God and try to force everybody to take his mark. But one thing is very, very clear in the scriptures. The Jews are going to have access to the Temple Mount. It will not be taken away from them. There's no possible way. 100% ironclad, the Jews will get their temple, just like Jesus Christ alluded to and Jesus Christ pointed to in the book of Daniel. It will take place. So I believe whatever President Barack Hussein Obama does at the UN, it's not going to affect what's going to happen on the Temple Mount. The Jews will have their territory on the Temple Mount, and I believe things will happen a little bit different that we see written in this article. One thing is for sure, I believe we'll find out really soon, because we're definitely in the last days. And I invite everyone to come to my website, read the book for free, and understand the things that are coming that haven't been fulfilled yet. Take advantage of my free book today and get all the details of how the Lord has revealed the future to us in His prophecy. This is Frank DiMora with the End Times Research Ministry.